Thanks for joining us for this session. This is humorously entitled, Give Me a Guide. This goes back to a conversation I had with David Anderson in about 2013, and I said, look, I teach Scrum, I'm here on your masterclass. What is Kanban? Can you give me a guide? And he said, oh yeah, that guide's coming out in about 6 months' time, and you'll have the summary, like you got the Scrum guide summary, and now you got the Kanban guide summary, and it didn't come out 6 months later. So last year, David asked me to do some other writing, and I said, you know, we talked about the guide. Maybe rather than do that writing, I should help produce that book. He said, yeah, good idea. And so we produced a draft last November. I hope many of you saw that and have downloaded it. And since that time, we've been working on this. We call this the White Book. That by the way, is a Twitter handle that you should know. I'm Andy Carmichael, CH. So we call it the White Book for obvious reasons. David's first book was called the Blue Book. And since November, we've been working on the Red Book, which is Essential Kanban Explained, which goes into a little bit more detail on the condensed guide. What we found with that book is we need more time. Something to do with work in progress, I think. I think there's some relationship between work in progress and lead time that we should pay attention to. Since, yes, that's one of the messages of the book. So anyway, what we haven't got the Red Book by now, but what we have got is the published version, the 1.0 version of this book, Essential Kanban Condensed. Actually, we squashed the screen here a bit, so it looks even more condensed. So do pass these around. Happily, the Lean Kanban University table has printed some of these. What I would say is, although the goal was to have this published today, it's probably tomorrow. And so if you're going to download it, I would suggest tomorrow morning would be a good time, and I'm sure it will be there. So what I'm doing at this session is just going back over that to actually give you what I wanted. What is the scope of Kanban? What's it about? Because lots of people that I talk to, and I'm sure you talk to as well, say, oh yeah, I'm using Kanban. And what they mean by that is that I've got some cards on the wall in an arbitrary pattern which doesn't conform to Scrum. So Chris Matz referred to it in the session, or was it Tony? I'm not sure. That he doesn't let people loose on Kanban who haven't yet learned the disciplines of Scrum, because it's not that we need less discipline when we have more powerful methods. So what is it that forms Essential Kanban? So, yeah, there's the fiction. It will be published. Since it's in the future, forecasting that is difficult to do. So what forms the essence of Kanban? And this is a very interesting exercise for me to actually say, well, what does it consist of? Because, again, back in 2013, I think maybe in 14, I sort of looked at the material that was telling people what is Kanban, and I said, yeah, I can summarize that in a tweet. And, start from here, visualize your policies, visualize your work, and improve. And that is Kanban. And all this other stuff is around it. Well, maybe, but maybe we need a little bit more than that if I want to have a guide. So, first of all, we say, what is Kanban? That's not necessarily an easy question to answer. And then, four sections, and we put them on this pillar diagram: values, agendas, foundational principles, and general practices. And as we formulated that into the book, there were some changes to the wording of those. Our principal reviewers, which included Mike, were able to help us in terms of, if you want to change the words of things that people are familiar with in terms of what is Kanban, you better be careful. So, but we did make some changes to the wordings around those things. But generally speaking, they form a framework to understand what does Kanban define as a method. The other interesting thing, and it was very helpful, I don't know who was in Mike's session just now, but I found Mike referring to stuff that has come into Kanban and is now a part of it. And obviously, particularly the values and the agendas, Mike has particularly contributed to, and his book, Kanban from the Inside, has made it part of what we talk about when we say what is Kanban. So values and agendas are a starting point, and that's early on in the book as well. And we'll look at some of these things. Now, what I know is, so I'm going to talk for another 35 minutes or so. There's always more stuff to talk about when I actually get into this so we won't necessarily cover it all. Hopefully, because we want some lunch and we want to be first in the queue, I can stop talking before the absolute deadline. You may want to pick up on some of the other things. You've got a reference to it in terms of that bit of paper, in terms of things that we don't talk about. And by all means, ask questions about, say, the forecasting or the scaling or whatever that we may not get to. So I'm going to follow the same structure as the Essential Kanban book. I like things that are short. I like shorter books than longer books. And what we try to do is not be original. It's nice to be original occasionally. David's very good at it. I'm trying to condense down what has become part of the practice of this community into as small a space as I can, without being so small that it's compressed into a sentence that you don't understand. And I realize that's a danger that I might have in terms of trying to get it down to too small. So we actually do need to unpack this, give it a bit more space. And that's actually what has happened to the condensed guide since its publication, as the review copy came out in November. So first of all, what's Kanban? Kanban is a method for defining, managing, and improving services which deliver knowledge work. So it's a short sentence but it contains some stuff that we need to understand, like what is a service and what is knowledge work. Knowledge work is intangible work which deals with the creation and the use of knowledge. It's a phrase created by Peter Drucker a long time ago in terms of looking back at what had been achieved in physical manufacturing to what was going to happen over the next 50 or 60 years, writing in the late 50s, early 60s, what was going to happen in terms of transformation or the need for productivity in knowledge work as opposed to in manufacturing, which had been transformed in the first half of the 20th century. And it's about services, and again, services is dealing with intangible stuff. Now, this broadens Kanban from what a lot of us think about it because we work in IT or we work in software development or whatever. It's about knowledge work, and that covers a much broader range of applications than just IT systems. It is software in the most general sense, that intangible sense of knowledge, of delivering work which is intangible. But it's broader than that. So the other thing that it may be an extension is that we're talking about defining, managing, and improving. Kanban's often been presented as just an improvement method, and that's at its heart. We want to do stuff, but we want to do it better than we have been doing it. So improvement is in there as a fundamental aspect of Kanban, but it also gives us guidance in defining it in the first place and managing it while we've got a definition. Now, the question, what is Kanban, is a little bit of a trick question, because you can say, what is Kanban? What is a Kanban? What is a Kanban system? And so, as well as the Kanban method really started in about 2007 when David presented the work he'd been doing at Microsoft and at Corbis and elsewhere. And at that time, the beginning of the Kanban community that we see now began. The Blue Book came out in 2010. We know that's the Kanban method. But it's borrowed a word from Japanese originally and from Toyota production systems going back to the 50s and 60s. It's borrowed a word which already has a meaning. So if you say, what is Kanban, we better unpack that as well. So a Kanban system is a delivery flow system that controls the amount of work in progress with visual signals, is how I define a Kanban system. One of the things I hope you find useful when you do download this book is that it does have quite an extensive glossary. And we worked hard to try and get to unambiguous and well understood terms, and so there's been quite a lot of feedback and input on that side. But this is how I define a Kanban system. The visual signals, and I got in problems with this in terms of actually writing it in the book, but the visual signals are sometimes called Kanbans. Exactly what a Kanban is in that sense, a card, you can see examples of it, like the card that you pick up when you go into the park so that not too many people go into the park. It's a mechanism of limiting work in progress. The bucket on the production line that goes back to the guy that's making bolts. And he doesn't make bolts until he gets this bucket, which he puts the bolts in. That's a Kanban. It's a signal to the guy making bolts. Don't make bolts until you get this container that you put the stuff in. We don't want more bolts than we can actually use. And so signals to control the work in progress is a well-known concept, and it's built into a lot of systems. So we're using for the Kanban method is the only time we capitalize the K. The rest of the time we keep it small. So Kanban systems, Kanban boards, and Kanbans as visual signals we leave as not capitalized. So it's an awkward thing because we want people to understand what we're on about. So here's an example of a Kanban system up here. We can see the first part of dealing with knowledge systems and services. Because the work is intangible, we've got to make the work visible in some way so we can see it flows. And that first step of visualization in Kanban is so important. We work on stuff all the time which is intangible, which we deliver stuff to people in, we may give them a document, but it isn't the document, it isn't the physical bits of paper or the file that arrives in the inbox. It's the information in there that is the delivery that we're making. And so making knowledge work, making services visible, and the flow of work in that is crucial. So that's why we see Kanban boards all over the place, limits on work in progress, and commitments and delivery points to define, and so on. So we define what Kanban is, at least what the words mean. So let's have a look at those four aspects of values, agendas, principles, and practices. And in the middle of it, we'll look at flow systems and what they look like. So I think Mike Burrow's work on values has proved so significant that it's easy to overlook it. But we suddenly realize, because he's actually he's actually explaining to us why we do the stuff that we do. And it's about respect for people. We start from here in terms of change initiatives because we're respecting the people that have gone before in terms of defining that process, and the people that are there in terms of their capacity to engage with change transformations which will change their self-image, maybe the context they're in, the whole job that they're doing. It's a difficult thing to engage in change. And part of that is the respect. Respect for all individuals involved is, in an initiative is necessary, not only for the success of the venture, but for the venture to be worthwhile at all. You know, I don't know whether you believe that, but I certainly do. I think I don't want to do ventures that don't have respect for people built into it. Mike's discussion on servant leadership in terms of not just serving the purpose, but pursuing purpose. What is important to be done? Why does this organisation exist? If we look at why organisations exist, if the people at the top answer that question in order to make profit or in order to return value to the shareholders or whatever, it is so disappointing that they don't understand why their organisation exists. And of course the best ones don't answer with that. They say, we're here to transform transport in the 21st century, or we're here to deliver, to connect people to friends, or whatever it is that they see as their purpose. And then people as employees, as customers, as shareholders can engage with that organisation because they understand its purpose. So transparency, balance, collaboration, very much looking at how the organisation works, transparency of actually believing that the flow of information within the organisation particularly, is absolutely vital to improve the way it works, to enable improvement. I won't go on every side segue that I think of as I do, but okay, I just mentioned it. Transparency, balance and collaboration go together because it's very much related to what happens within the organisation, how it works, and building innovative collaborative organisations. How information flows within an organisation, how people use information, do they use it? Again, Chris Matz, I think, referred to it in the keynote. Is information used to protect my situation, to protect my bonus within the organisation, to make my department look good, or is it used for the purpose of the organisation fulfilling that? Generative organisations that are using information, the flow of information within the organisation in order that the purpose gets better. When things go wrong, they don't look for a scapegoat or punish the guilty. They inquire, what can we learn from this situation? And that culture in an organisation, the generative organisation, is key. And I'm trying to think of the model that I'm quoting, but I can't, doesn't come to mind. Customer focus, flow and leadership is more the outward-looking set of values, where we're looking at what we do for our customers. We'll come to that in a second as well when we talk about the agendas. And understanding and agreement and respect. Fundamental understanding, particularly in the sense of understanding ourselves and understanding our organisation, understanding where we are. These are necessary, it's part of the start from here, necessary to know what our starting point is in order that we can improve. And again, getting agreement from people to join in. Now, the values and the agendas are closely linked. And there are three of them. I think I'm quoting Mike when I say that it might be David Anderson. If you have a method which is predicated on start from here, and here we are, what we're doing, it's sort of like maybe we don't have an agenda. We don't come with an agenda. In fact, this, I think, was part of what David Anderson started teaching in terms of the coaching of Kanban. Don't come as a coach with an agenda. See what the organisation is trying to do. See what the situation is. As that developed, we actually saw that there are some agendas which are common to Kanban implementations. Sustainability, service orientation, and survivability. So again, they relate to the values. You may put them in different categories, whatever you like, but the sustainability agenda is about finding a sustainable pace and improving focus within the organisation. It's somewhat inward-looking, as they're saying, we need a process, a set of processes, a network of services in our organisation that delivers its purpose. And so is looking at how people work within that. And balance, which is one of the values, is key to sustainability. Balancing the demand for a service with the capability of the service that you currently have. So last year I was working in an organisation, and the CEO decided that this particular initiative was absolutely crucial. It needed to be done now. Now, as good Kanban practitioners, what should you do in that situation? What is the question you should ask? I don't know if you've got some suggestions for it. Maybe what are you going to stop doing so that you can do this thing now? Because it's not like your organisation, and particularly in terms of software systems, the people delivering change in your systems, it's not that they're not planning to do some stuff right now. Oh yeah, but I've got all this money now. Because this is my initiative, I'm going to put all this money on this table so you can have as many people, as many contractors, as many whatever, as you want to have, because I want this done now. He didn't say you can have as much money as you like. Of course he didn't. He said, you want that much? Cut that down by 25%. So the key thing is that everybody understands that balancing the demand with the capability of a service is really crucial. So we have to build that balance. This is part of sustainability, and it's partly why a method which says you should limit your work in progress is actually built on respect for people. It's actually understanding what people are doing and can do, that you look at the capability and the capacity of a service to deliver. So it's part of the sustainability agenda. The wonderful thing, of course, about limiting work in progress is if you do so, thinking that, okay, because I limit the work that I'm working on, I might get less, but nevertheless it's the right thing to do, you actually find the delivery rate goes up. It's sort of magic and doesn't seem to quite tie in with Little Soul. We'll come to that. Service orientation agenda. This is an agenda that should be the most explicit in your organisation. Again, I think it came out in what Mike has just talked about in terms of servant leadership. A focus on customers, a focus on what they're doing, that is the most explicit thing. Because there are many, many services in large organisations, everybody needs to know who their customer is, and some of those services will have customers that are internal, but in a sense they also know the service that they're delivering at the end of the day. And the survivability agenda is concerned with staying competitive and adaptive. So obviously I need to move faster than I am doing, but any questions at this point? Values and agendas, because Mike's in the room and I talk too much about this. Okay. So, how many principles are there in Kanban? It's a trick question, obviously, and you can read. But when I said to David, I think we've got 4 principles in Kanban. I think there are only 3. Because start from here and respecting existing roles and responsibilities are pretty much the same thing. We're starting from here in this aspect, we're starting from here in this aspect. So he said, yeah, okay, that's absolutely true. There are 3, but there's actually 3 more. So the 3 change management principles, which I hope you're familiar with if you've looked at Kanban before, start with what you do now, understanding current processes as actually practiced, not just as written down, respecting existing roles, responsibility and job titles, all part of start from here. Agree, this value of agreement, to pursue involvement through evolutionary change, come to what that means, encourage active leadership at every level. This is all about we change from where we are to where we go, this top part of the pillar here. But there are 3 others. And, well, the little preamble there is entertaining to read. Your organisation is an ecosystem of interdependent services. Kanban acknowledges this with its 3 service deliverables, not just applied to one service, but the network of services. Focus on the customer. Manage the work, let people self-organise around it, quite a radical statement, and evolve policies to improve. The thing about that is if you're using policies to improve a complex system, you don't necessarily know when you start whether this policy, I want more WIP or I want less WIP, will improve things according to your fitness criteria or make things worse. It is a complex system, and those simple levers don't work necessarily in the way that you think. This is classic systems thinking and Donella Meadows and this, that you've got a lever, you think you should push it that way, and actually the likelihood is you should pull it the other way to really improve things. So evolve those policies by making them explicit, changing them in an experimental way, and keeping change that improves things. Dampen change that doesn't. Now, just before we do in 5 minutes, the principles and the practices, how do we describe flow systems? And I was interested in this, and interested in getting this into the guide because we have problems with terminology and we have problems with definition. It's why perhaps a third of the book is glossary in actually defining what we mean by the various terms. So, here we are, this is this board again, and my first question is this a Kanban system?
No, because the system is not just the board.
Okay, yeah, okay. But, okay, you can't tell, I think is what you're saying. You can't tell if this is a Kanban system. But from what you can see on this board, are there things that suggest there should be something else in terms of being a Kanban system? The WIP limits. So it is part of the definition of a Kanban system is that it uses signals, it uses visual signals to limit work in progress. So if it's a Kanban system as opposed to just a flow system of work, we should expect to see WIP limits on that, or WIP controlled in some manner. Sometimes in terms of the delivery of the complete thing, we can have a cadence that says, okay, well we release every month, and however much stuff you got to there, our process can cope with delivering, because we've been limiting WIP over the rest of the thing. There's one other thing I'm looking for in terms of what is this a Kanban system? It is identifying the commitment point and the delivery point of your system. And it's not often picked up, but is absolutely vital if we want to apply improvement across a network of services, that we know, each service knows where did I commit that I would deliver this work and when is it finished. Now, obviously, explicit policies and other things are going to help us to actually know why it moved across from one column to the other. We had definitions of done or definitions of ready in these things. This kind of pattern where you have a column with an ongoing and ready is quite important in my view, because the difference between that and just having another column called ready is that the WIP limit applies to this whole thing. I can say this is finished as far as I'm concerned in this part of the activity, but I can't push it to the next service that is the next part activity that's going to pick it up. So, yeah, WIP limits are crucial, and particularly between the commitment point and the delivery point, we expect there to be numbers in each of those columns, or however the WIP is controlled. So, definitions are key ones. Simply, lead time is the time between the commitment point and the delivery point. We come to what you call the times in between later on. Delivery rate, the number of items per unit of time that cross that delivery line. Now, yeah, there's more definitions around those things, and you'll need to read the book that you're going to download later. And work in progress, these items represented by these cards or tickets or whatever they are, but the actual work in progress, which we measure just by counting the items. And one of the reasons we do that is because there is a simple correlation between lead time, delivery rate, and work in progress. It's based on Little's law, which was defined in or proved in a paper in 1961. Never mind what that was. It's about queuing theory and why you use lambda and L and W. But in our terms, having defined what lead time is, having defined what delivery rate is and what work in progress is, so counted items, this law says the average delivery rate, that's what the bar means, is equal to the average work in progress divided by the average lead time. Subject to several conditions. You don't lose tickets along the way, because that'll mess up the equation, and the system is not trending, stationary if you want the mathematical term. And both those things can be not applicable to the data you get out of your system, so be careful about it. I recommend Dan Vacanti's book in terms of how to improve the data you get out of your Kanban systems. But it should be very much part of what we do to ensure that we're producing the right data in this area. So, sorry, there's a little bit down here, a little bit of a bugbear for me. What do you do if you're not talking about between the delivery rate and the commitment point and the delivery point? Throughput and time in process are useful terms. Again, definitions in the glossary. What does Little's law tell us about the effect of WIP on lead time? I mean, first of all, just looking at Little's law, because I think most Kanban practitioners, including myself, do not spend their time obsessing, maybe it's not true about me, obsessing about Little's law. I tend to obsess about stuff like that. But most people, it's not the most relevant thing in their day-to-day job of it was Little's law. It's what Little's law points to in terms of what we should do, because it's something that we can't avoid. It's going to be true, at least in the long run, if you take a long enough averaging period so that the trending in the system is averaged out. But it's what it can help us do in terms of making decisions. Now, these are three variables, and all three of them vary all the time through our systems. WIP goes up and down. You may think, here's the WIP limit, no, but it's not, we're not always at the WIP limit in every column, and sometimes we're over it, because our policy there is, this is our guideline. It's not necessarily saying, you know, stop all work if we break a WIP limit. So our WIP goes up and down, and we need to learn from that and know what it is. And these go up and down. But this is our most controllable item. The WIP limit is something as a policy that we can set. Setting a policy like you will deliver 45 stories every week is not a good policy, right? We set policies about quality for how much stuff we deliver. And similarly, lead time is something we observe in terms of when items get finished. But this one we can actually set with a policy, or we influence strongly with a policy. So if we reduce the WIP limit and the delivery rate stays the same, it's inevitable eventually that lead time will come down. And that's very important. And managing for reduced lead time, again, it's not what most managers do, but it's a crucial aspect. What does Little's law not tell us about delivery rate? Well, you have to be careful, because if you just look at Little's law and say, well, more WIP, that'll give us more delivery rate. Only if lead time stays the same. Lead time will not stay the same if you increase WIP. Sorry, you have to think about the state of the system. I can say that fairly confidently about most knowledge work environments, because we have too much work. WIP is too high to be efficient and to have low lead times. We are overburdened with work. So limiting WIP will reduce the overburdening and will increase delivery rate, right? So reduce this, this goes down, and magically this goes up if we're in an overburdened situation. If we're in a sparsely populated, so we don't have enough work, we're sitting around waiting for the phone to ring, right? And then suddenly someone rings us up and says, would you come and fit a tap on my sink? Right. Okay, suddenly I've got some work in progress. What's going to happen to delivery rate? It'll go up, right, because we don't have enough work. So Little's law covers that scenario, but it's just not the normal scenario we're dealing with in knowledge work. So that's the conclusion, really. Little's law shows us that in order to optimize lead time, we have to control the work in progress. And it doesn't tell us what the work in progress limit should be. We can't tell that, without a context. But it does tell us that they're related and we have to do it. And that little diagram helps us understand Little's law graphically. So there are general practices. And here they are. The general practices all involve visualize, limit work in progress, manage flow, make policies explicit, feedback loops, improve and evolve. I'm not going to talk about them all, but certainly reference you to the book. These practices all involve seeing the work and the policies that are in there and improving the processes in an evolutionary fashion, keeping and amplifying useful change, learning from and reversing or dampening ineffective change. Applies to all these areas. Obviously, starting with those top two is pretty crucial. Why do we visualize work? Because knowledge work is invisible. Even if you think your knowledge work is handing the reels with the film in to the projectionist, there's the physical work. No. Right? It's not the media that you deliver work in. It's not whether it's a document or whether it's a PDF or whether it's a PowerPoint. It's the information that you're delivering through the work. So making that work visible is a really crucial first step. And we talk about, so some of the things that I won't talk about, which goes on in terms of the second half of the book, are things like how we introduce Kanban to organizations and how we understand the degree to which Kanban is part of what we do. So Mike has already mentioned the static method as a way to introduce Kanban into a new context, and the Litmus test, which made it into the guide. Again, this is a sort of curating process of what, out of the enormous amount of stuff this community has produced, that we actually put into 40 pages of definition of what's in the method. But the Litmus test, to my mind, was an important thing to put in because it helps us see to what degree these practices and principles are being applied. There's one practice here, but I'll just put it up because Mike mentioned it. And this slide here was more or less in Mike's presentation as well. The cadences are the feedback loops. In terms of essential Kanban and what is essentially part of Kanban, what we're saying is feedback loops are essential. And feedback loops that address strategic alignment, operational coordination, risk management, service improvement, replenishment, flow on a day-by-day basis, customer deliveries. We need feedback loops around this that are going to help us improve and understand what we are. Those feedback loops have to be there in some sense. This diagram, which David drew really in the context of ESP, Enterprise Service Planning, is sort of saying, okay, well, what meetings exist in a large organization doing Kanban in order to get operational coordination, for example, or service improvement, or day by day looking at the flow and the blockages and so on. So these set of 7 cadences and the frequency that they occur and so on is a solution in context, but the principle there is implement feedback loops. And generally speaking, if you're starting Kanban with one team, you certainly don't need 7 meetings. But in a sense, the way these feedback loops in terms of strategic alliance and operational coordination, they have to be addressed somewhere. It's probably a signal to stop talking. So I'll finish with this slide and then we can go to questions, and if there's some of the other aspects that we haven't talked about you want to pick up in the questions, that's fine. Okay, I mentioned the tweet. You can summarize how to adopt Kanban in a very small number of words, and it covers certainly the change principles, and much of the practices of Kanban. They're all about, first is just this change of eyesight, in a sense, seeing work differently, and then agreeing to start from here. So I haven't done anything in those first 2 points there, but validating, with visible work in progress, validating improvements, that's all we're doing. But static, and I refer you to Mike's talk on that in terms of what it is, and the litmus test, these are the broad outline of the litmus test questions, 4 of them. First one, has management behavior changed to enable Kanban? Just getting a team to adopt Kanban will not change the attitude of management to work in progress and respecting WIP limits, for example. It's a foundational thing. You've got to have that. Has the customer interface changed? Have you negotiated with the customer? And first of all, do you know who it is? Who wants the work? Why do they want it? Have you negotiated with the customer deferred commitment? If the customer says, I want this, and that is the commitment to start work, you cannot limit work in progress. You do not have a pull system, you have a push system. So negotiating with the customer a different way of working, and David has a very good story of this in terms of the situation at Microsoft, where very poor performing in terms of lead time going on, and by changing the conversation, by saying, look, if we deliver stuff every 28 days when you tell us the most important thing, but we don't commit to doing it, we don't estimate the work until we're ready to do it, that changes the conversation. So changing their customer interface is important. Has the customer contract change informed by Kanban? Are you gathering those metrics on lead time and delivery rates so that you can have the conversation with the customer of what your capability and your capacity is? Right, so get the metrics there, build them in, and then you can begin to answer those questions. And has your service delivery business model changed to exploit Kanban? It's things like classes of service. It's things like balancing loads between services because you can move resources around, and staff liquidity and work liquidity and so on. I recommend that to you. So I'm stopping at this point. We have just a few minutes for questions, particularly if you want to be first in the queue for lunch. So fire away. Thank you very much.
I'm quite new to Kanban and to little slow. No familiar with Kanban. When I see that if you keep WIP constant, then your lead time stabilizes. With lead time being defined as the time between when it's been committed and then delivered.
Yeah. So the lead time is how long it takes for one item to get from there to there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my more of a curiosity question is, on a per item basis, the minute, say for example, a team member starts working on one item, irrespective of how many other tickets there are for the rest of the team to pick up, this person's time would take the time depending on how ready he was made for starting work and how long it takes to finish work. So this lead time, in my probably...
So why is it not always the same? And it's because people work on more than one item at the same time. They get blocked by one item, so they start another one. Lots of reasons why people have more than one item in progress. And sometimes we need collaboration between people. So the interesting thing about Little's Law, it's just true. You know, as a non-trending system, this is true. And so if you get an item that is blocked for ages, it will change the average lead time. Maybe it's usually the lead time is very long because nobody's working on it. You know, it's blocked by something. But nevertheless, it will change the averages in that equation. So it's an interesting thing to look at, and it's an interesting thing to think about in different contexts of why it works and actually when it doesn't work. Because if we do have a trending system, then, so more and more work in progress, stuff never being delivered, right? then that's not a situation when you can use Little's law until you actually stop the trending and deliver as much as you commit to. Any other? So do come and talk to me about Little's law afterwards. I'm always interested. But any other questions on other topics? Yeah.
In the blue book, David started saying that it was a recipe for success, and the first item was focused on quality. I missed this point in the.
So I would say, yeah, you may be right. I was saying, and always take criticism. Did you review the draft? But I would say it comes into focus on the customer, and also in the managed flow section we talk about fitness for purpose, and what, both in terms of what a customer needs in terms of delivery rate and flow rate, but also what a customer needs in terms of quality. So, absolutely, very good point. Maybe I didn't stress it enough, but I think it comes into customer focus in general. And I think the other thing I would say is this is a summary of the Kanban knowledge base at the sort of what we all accept sort of level. It's not trying to do something original. It doesn't cover and it doesn't give you a step-by-step process in every area. It references the static, which does have a number of steps, but in a sense it's saying, okay, learn more about static if you want to use it than you'll get from the 40-page guide.
A second question.
Yep.
About the Kanban analysis. I didn't find any good description of the original review or this review patterns. Do you know where you can find it?
So, tell me what you get out of the latest version of the Essential Kanban Condensed. They are very short, short summaries of what those cadences are for, but they are all 7 covered in there with a paragraph or so. That's all we've got room for. Essential Kanban Explained, the red book, whatever it is called in the end, quite a lot has been written in that area, but as I said, that will be published in the future.
Any draft?
Talk to me afterwards, I suppose. Yeah.
If you elaborate on the word commitment, I think that might be actually the root cause. You want to do things and
Yes. So it's also interesting in terms of how Scrum has used commitment and how Scrum has changed from not using commitment. In Scrum, commitment meant you do a planning meeting, you plan what you do for 2 weeks, and then you commit. This is what it used to mean. You commit to doing that work in the 2 weeks. Oh, but by the way, the 2 weeks is fixed, and you can't change those things. So if you've committed to doing it, what are you going to do? Overtime? It's not what they meant. So they changed the word in Scrum from commitment to forecast. In this sense, it's much more about a commitment to say, okay, you want this work, customer agrees he wants this work as soon as possible, or according to the service level agreement, whatever, and the service agrees that it will deliver this item. And because we know there's variability in lead times, for example, we don't know precisely when it will be delivered, but it's a commitment to deliver it. Not to say nothing ever changes, but we use the word abort if you decide, after committing to do a piece of work, you abort it. Did try and persuade David to use a different word, but that is the word. And it's an ugly word because it doesn't happen very often, we hope. It's just you committed to it, sometimes you have to abort it, but generally speaking, the service is going to keep on working on it until it's delivered. So that's what we mean by commitment. Was your question slightly different than that? Yeah. I think we're trying to change the conversation really between managers and services, or managers of services and the staff working on it, to focus on the work, and to actually base forecasts on what has happened, on the data that comes out of the system. We're out of time. And thank you very much for your attention. Do download that. Thank you.